Yeah, what's going on, everybody? It's your boy, the brand new with you guys today, and welcome to my channel. Do all the things the algorithm likes, like the video, comment, and subscribe as we get started on another week of YouTube videos. And as I'm working on some things in the background, like a Redfall review, Jedi Survivor review, I'm gonna do some reactions. So today's reaction, I'm gonna react to a video I came across, haven't watched it yet, by Generation Tech, called Kestis is Proof the Jedi Were Wrong. If you watch my Twitch streams, will be in link in the description box below. I often talk about why the Jedi were wrong, and particularly why the Jedi Council during Yoda's time was wrong, and why he was probably one of the worst Jedi leaders when it comes to the history of Star Wars. And so, which generally starts like a lot of debate. So we're gonna watch this, react to this video from Generation Tech. I mean, and as always, show the original creators some love, give them a like, get them a watch. If you enjoy their content, give them a subscription as well, and do all the nice things that that you would do for me for them. So let's get to this video for Generation Tech. Kestis is Proof the Jedi Were Wrong.
You ever see someone in public who's struggling and you really want to help them, but you're too shy to do it because you're afraid other people will judge you? Well, have you ever considered the fact that it's not worth thinking about the opinions of people who will judge you for just trying to make the world a better place? Trust your good intentions. Anyway, guys, I hope you guys are enjoying the latest chapter in Cal Kestis' journey as a Jedi. And if the video games aren't your thing, well, stay tuned to this channel. We'll be putting up our own playthrough with our own commentary shortly. Me and Congo will do all the damn platforming and puzzles so that you guys don't have to. Also, for those of you who are interested in getting your hands on a replica Cal Kestis lightsaber for your own playthrough, check out the new Chaos X bundle from our sponsor, Onasaber.com. The Chaos X replicates Cal's lightsaber, which he acquired from Master Jaro Tapal, who was mortally wounded by blaster fire during Order 66. That incident actually damages Jaro's lightsaber, which you can see in the hilt of the Chaos X. The Chaos X is available in both standard RGB tube configuration or the pixel board configuration, which means, like this blade right here, you have a LED running alongside the length of the entire tube so that you can do all sorts of cool things like that. And if you guys are into sparring and really hitting these things hard, I do recommend you check out the standard RGB tube instead. Order the KSX for your playthrough of Jedi Survivor and you'll get the scabbard included for free as long as you purchase it in the
What to say is right now, since he's his little ad thing, we're not going to edit out the ad thing. We're going to show him some respect so he can have his little ad in the video. But we'll mention, you might see him back there. I got two lightsabers. I got those from Crimson Dawn. I have a video. I don't know if you guys can see them or not, but I have a video unboxing those and talk about the Crimson Dawn lightsabers. Crimson Dawn is one of the better, lower budget. I won't say lower budget in terms of like lightsabers themselves. But like if you're on a lower budget, Crimson Dawn is one of the better companies you can go to get lightsabers. Saber Trio being the best of the best if you are willing to spend an extra few more dollars. For example, like I'm not trying to like hurt this guy's like sponsor video, but if you can afford $430 for a lightsaber, go to Saber Trio. Looking for like to save some money and not break the bank. 180 for a very basic looking hilt. Go to Crimson Dawn, you can get a way better saber, way better bundle for a way lower price. Just gonna throw it out there.
Bundle, which we'll link down in the description below.
This is a
time limited special, so check it out.
So to point that out, I'm a nobody. I'm not sponsored by Crimson Dawn. I'm not sponsored by Crimson Saber. I get no sponsorships because I'm a nobody. You see my video ratios.
Thank you for your patience. On to the rest of the video. Now, one of the things I want you guys to think about when you're going through Jedi Survivor is how Cal Kestis has redefined what it means to be a Jedi. It's arguably one of the most important professions in all of Star Wars. It's definitely the role that most young fans assume when they're pretending that they're in Star Wars. In the original trilogy, the Jedi were mysterious and not too much was known about them, their belief or skills. They're kind of just these generic monk-like good guys. Everything we knew about their belief system came from a handful of vague quotes from Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda.
The Force is what gives the Jedi his power. It's an energy field created by all living things. It surrounds us and penetrates us. It binds the galaxy together.
All right, I'll give it a try.
No. Try not. Do. Or do not. There is no try.
Many of these things are actually taken from other belief systems or philosophies in life. And although they served the movie trilogy well, these were just individual thoughts that did not come together and form an actual belief system. And back then that was okay, because, you know, people back then were a little different in how they consumed media. People would see a few movies in theater every year, they would watch the same dozen TV channels.
Ain't that the fucking truth? Like, I don't think people understand like that the whole gap there is when it comes to, you know, how we consume media in 2023 versus how they consume media in, you know, I don't know if you guys, I'll send us, you can see it in, you know, where's that, 1977. Yeah, that's my shirt. It's my nice little Star Wars shirt. Yeah, like back then they didn't have social media, they didn't have Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and like all these platforms where, you know, you have millions of people, billions of people who all share, you know, the same love for any kind of fandom and all talk about that fandom and sharing their experience with the fandom and what their opinions are of that fandom. Whereas like back then, whatever opinions you had, you talked to it with your family or your close friends, and that's basically it.
Channels at home. There wasn't even cable back then, or renting VHSs so that you can watch things at home, pause and rewind as you please. The only way you're gonna watch Star Wars a second time was by going to a theater for a second time. It's not that people were necessarily starved for content back then, there was just greater appreciation for the content that existed, and people were more focused on the content that existed and took a longer time digesting that content when compared to
like that comment, even when it comes to like being more focused, that's also like you say less opinionated, because like you cherish what you have around you. Like, I have a buddy of mine named Rex, and Rex is an older guy. You know, he was born, you know, when the original trilogy of Star Wars came out. So when me and him talk about the Star Wars community right now, he has the opinion of, you know, the older generation, where it's like, I just love Star Wars. It's like, I just want to watch, like, talking, speaking for him, when I say that he always tells me that he loves Star Wars, that he enjoys basically any content they put out because it's just Star Wars content. He sees what's bad and he acknowledges what's bad, but he also sees what's good within the things that are called bad. Where it's like, for me, I'm way more opinionated than he is. I'm way more nitpicky than he is. Not to the same extreme as like the meme Star Wars fan who hates everything. Because honestly, there isn't any piece of Star Wars content that I've personally seen that I've hated. You know, there's things that I would change. There's things that I'll nitpick about. But it's something that I've seen that I just like outright hate.
Today's, you know, lightning fast streaming services. And so those vague lines about the Force formed an entire religion, a belief system that was brought to life by fans and fans alone. I mean, George Lucas more or less abandoned Star Wars for quite some time until a writer known as Timothy Zahn created the Thrawn series, and that became so popular that George Lucas realized he had an opportunity here to make some more money. I mean, to make another trilogy. The prequels did the opposite of what the original trilogy did with the Jedi. We perhaps learned too much about the Order, about the Force, about the midichlorians, and any logical person would quickly come to a conclusion that the Jedi we had lionized for...
Now we're pausing again quickly here, but this won't be as long of a tangent, but I feel like the prequel trilogy, when it comes to like what they told us about the Jedi, might be, you know, basically the worst storytelling of the Jedi. When we think about the original trilogy, think about the Old Republic, think about the High Republic, all of those seem like a better telling of the Jedi in terms of, you know, things being more positive than the prequel trilogy, where it's like, gosh, these dudes are uptight, they're way too political, they're being used as a tool for politicians and things like that. Like they don't seem like, you know, this neutral, you know, good people who are there for protecting the galaxy, as they, you know, aren't kind of like depicted, you know, in literature in the original trilogy.
So long amongst the Star Wars fandom had major flaws at the institutional level. As an organization, the Jedi might have been well-intentioned, but they also were quite hypocritical. So many of the things that they preached against, like letting one's fear take over control, was practiced by the highest ranking members of the Jedi Order. Anakin Skywalker, the Chosen One, was not denied training because of some mistake the young boy made or some inherent evil the boy possessed. Instead, he got rejected basically because of a technicality.
He's too old. An apprentice you have, Qui-Gon. Impossible to take out a second. The code forbids it.
And then we had the sequel trilogy, and the message more or less became this.
Let the past die. Kill it if you have to.
Buying an IP with a very passionate fan base is not for everyone, Disney. But they eventually realized that you can't just break everything and start a new story. Franchises are only popular when you invest time in the characters that are involved in the stories, and to create the type of characters that are popular in the Star Wars franchise, well, that can take many years, decades, multiple books, TV shows, and movies. And so, not surprisingly, the current generation of Star Wars content, it actually is sandwiched in between kind of the stuff we like. You know, the Clone Wars and the Galactic Empire all pretty much takes place in this time period, except for The Mandalorian, which takes place a little after. We never really got to see Jedi during this time period. And now we've had an entire mediocre show about Obi-Wan Kenobi doing his best to stay alive on Tatooine. We've even caught a glimpse of the backstory of Kanan Jarrus, who also escaped Order 66. No part of the franchise has done a better job at showing us what it's like to be Order 66 survivor than Jedi Fallen Order and now Jedi Survivor. In all honesty, Cal Kestis has quickly turned into one of the most likable Jedi in the franchise, but also one of the more important ones. And that's because I truly believe his own journey to becoming a Jedi Knight, without the help of any other living Jedi, something that Kanan Jarrus, Luke Skywalker, and a few other, I guess, post-Order 66 Jedi experienced, is a very important lesson that a lot of the audience and new writers for Disney can learn from. It could also inform us about how future Jedi Orders that are more sustainable could be created. You know, Cal Kestis was a Padawan when Order 66 occurred, and he immediately went into hiding. And like most successful Order 66 survivors, Cal was incredibly disciplined when it came to hiding who he really was. He never waved around his lightsaber, and it was only when his pal Prof was at risk of death by gravity that he used the Force. And somehow he was spotted. Those probe droids are pretty good. You know, before this happened, while he was in exile, that was actually a really important period in Cal's life. Not only because he was a teenager, and those were like, you know, very transformative years in a young man's life, but also because of what he as a Jedi went through. Sometimes the absence of something can be as impactful as the presence of something. Like all Jedi youngling, Cal Kestis would have belonged to a clan within the Jedi, and together his clan would have been taught by all the masters in the Order, like Yoda or perhaps even Kelleran Beck. The type of training he was going to get at this stage of his career was more basic, you know, how to use a lightsaber, how to levitate things with the Force. But the philosophy and the ethics of what it really meant to be a Jedi, this wasn't something you would understand at the age of 5. I mean, even when Cal Kestis was, 10 years old, that's when Order 66 happened, I don't even think he was ready for that talk at that point either. And so the point here is Cal Kestis learned all the basics, and at the same time wasn't old enough to get indoctrinated in the institutional thinking of the Jedi Order or its ideology, which, again, was heavily based on fear and a desire to control all of its members. Instead, during his formative teenage years, Cal Kestis did nothing related to being a Jedi. Instead, he had to grow up quickly, learn how to be a day laborer, and also keep his past hidden. A lot of people might think, oh, this is a tough situation for him to be, this is bad for a young child to go through, but I would argue you should be wary of pitying people who go through hardship, just like you should be wary of not pitying people who have no hardship in their life, right? Being a teenager is tough enough already, but being a teenager ex-Jedi during Order 66, that will break a weak person, but it will make a great Jedi. And actively trying to hide that you're a Jedi all those years meant that Cal Kestis spent 5 years undoing everything he could, unlearning everything he was taught. And he was actually really successful at that, which is why in the beginning of Jedi Fallen Order, you basically have no skills. It's a fun gameplay mechanic that actually ties into the story very well. And so by the time Jedi Fallen Order starts, Cal Kestis will have spent 2/3 of his life becoming a Jedi and 1/3 of his life undoing becoming a Jedi. Now, there's something incredibly rewarding and challenging with taking such drastic turns in your life. A Jedi technically never gets a chance.
I would also like add when it comes to Cal Kestis and what makes him, the character that he is in terms of like why he's so enjoyable and likable for us as gamers is he's relatable. Cal Kestis isn't your prototypical Jedi, which is a good thing. We're drawn to characters of Star Wars who aren't prototypical. We're drawn to Ahsoka because she's not the prototypical Jedi. We're drawn to Anakin because he's not the prototypical Jedi. Even Kanan Jarrus kind of like doesn't seem like your typical Jedi. Sorry, I'm not gonna explain that. Like I don't think Obi-Wan Kenobi, as much as we all love Obi-Wan, I don't think we will love Obi-Wan Kenobi if we played him as a video game character, because he would be pretty, prototypical, which will also be kind of boring. He doesn't have the extremes as those previously mentioned characters, Anakin, Ahsoka, Kanan Jarrus, Ezra Bridger, Cal Kestis. He doesn't have those extremes that they have as characters. And us as people, as humans, we have our human element that we're drawn to that. And the characters, we're drawn to the anger, we're drawn to the sadness, we're drawn to the happiness, we're drawn to the love that they feel, we're drawn to every emotion that they go through. So if a character doesn't have any of those traits, doesn't have any of those feelings and those emotions and all those extremes, then we're not as invested in those characters. But all those characters I mentioned all have those extremes. They all have love, they all have fear, they all have anger. Like a lot of the Jedi are supposed to hide their anger or not feel fear and just be. Whereas like you see Anakin angry, you see Cal Kestis angry, you see Quinlan Vos angry, you see Ahsoka angry, you see them happy, you see them cry, you see them love, you see them fall in love, you see them get interested in the idea of love. And even when it comes to Obi-Wan, we all know about Satine and that he does love her, but he tries to like hide that and avoid that because he's a Jedi. He's trying to be the prototype Jedi. But for Cal Kestis in particular, I feel like that's why we all gravitate towards Cal, and that's just because we're playing as him, so it's kind of like our character, but also because he's a relatable character who embraces the emotions that you get and the feelings that you get as a human being, and not just be some kind of like boring board of dialogue like some Jedi are.
They'll leave the order to put a pause on what they're doing, and when they usually do leave, coming back is not an option. But Cal Kestis was forced into this situation, and while he was in exile, he probably did a lot of soul searching on what his previous life meant. He had a lot of time to think about the theory of being a Jedi without actually practicing it.
Every time you feed your pet Hills, you help feed a shelter pet, which helps make them healthy, happy, and more adoptable, changing their life forever, so they can change yours. Science did that.
First, let's prep the meat. No beef. First, we're gonna get the ingredients.
And even though having the Force, being able to manipulate your environment around you seems like one of the most amazing things, when you grow up with something like this, an innate ability that you already have, you have much less of an appreciation until it's taken away from you. And that's what happens here. I mean, I don't think Cal Kestis understood how gifted he was until he lost everything. And initially, it seemed like Cal forgot about everything. It's almost as if he wanted to continue living as a scrapper. But adventure seems to have a way of finding individuals like Cal who have the right tools to save the world. And as he began to realize once again that he needed to fight once again, not because of some selfish desire for revenge or hatred, but because he wanted to protect other people, he started relearning how to become a Jedi once again as a much more mature individual who can still kind of recollect a lot of that training he had forgotten. Cal Kestis is actually able to go through a lot of things that most Jedi would go through only once in their life and at a very young age where it's not meaningful. And so Cal actually goes to Illume as an adult and gets another lightsaber. He goes through the gathering ritual as an adult. He's constantly haunted by the death of his master during Order 66. Cal believed that he could have saved his master had he been a better student. But because Cal is much more mature than he once was, he's able to come to a realization that he did try his best. He's able to forgive himself as a result. Cal gets to do something that I think a lot of people wish we had an opportunity to do at a much younger age. He's able to reflect on his early childhood when he technically still is a child. When the memories are still fresh in his head, when he's still able to remember all of those early lessons as a Jedi that now, as an older individual, he's able to interpret much better. And because he was relearning how to be a Jedi, he could skip lessons he didn't need and draw on the lessons he needed immediately because of whatever crazy situation he was going through. And because of his young age and the lack of written records to use as reference, Cal's actual training doesn't just come from the Jedi Order. Instead, it's more natural and instinctive. Whenever he confronts a problem, he goes and meditates and tries to remember the Force technique that is needed to solve that problem. It's a very reverse kind of way of learning things. Cal's use of the Force would become very practical and based on his actual needs. It's a very minimalistic style of training that I think fits closer to what the Jedi are actually supposed to be. You see, the Jedi need to have a close connection to the Force, so close that they almost cease thinking and become kind of a part of the subconscious that is the cosmic Force. Everything the Jedi Order set up, all the rules, the codes, the punishments, these are created by human beings, imperfect individuals, and these are rules that were created based on fear mostly. And because using the Force is all mental, if your mind is clouded with a million protocols and a million more philosophies of what you should do and why, I imagine your power is going to suffer. And I think that's something the Jedi Order never realized, especially in those latter days when it was so blinded by nonsense, politics, the war, that they couldn't even smell the Sith Lords in their office. They didn't even realize how powerless they had become. And I think most of the problems within the Jedi institution actually come from
that this moment of showing like Palpatine and them not even knowing that Palpatine was freaking a Sith, kind of, because we're talking about Jedi Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor. I'm not going to spoil anything, but there's a certain moment in the game that's a big plot twist, and Cal Kestis is like, how didn't we know? How couldn't we tell? And it's kind of the same thing when it comes to like the prequels, where it's like they couldn't tell that the senator was a Sith. And it's like, I like to refer to like the Dragon Ball Z thing, where it's like you can suppress your power if you're strong enough and have strong enough will to where the strongest of Jedi or the strongest of Z fighters can't detect you. Just suppress your power, and that's what Palpatine did, and that's what the character in Survivor did. It suppressed his power to a point to where no one could tell. Something like that. That moment reminded me of that. Also, just want to add that as well, is that the most popular phrasing used in Star Wars, or one of the most popular phrases used in Star Wars, is a gray Jedi. Everyone's drawn to the idea of a gray Jedi because people love the idea of the Jedi, but they don't want the rules. And the gray Jedi is essentially a Jedi without the rules. And even you're starting to see videos pop up of people calling Cal Kestis a gray Jedi. So it's like, people they romanticize the idea of a gray Jedi, when reality is it's just a Jedi who doesn't have to follow the rules of the Jedi Council and Jedi Order. That's what we love. We don't really necessarily love the idea of a gray Jedi. We just love the idea of not having to follow the rules, being able to have all the powers without the rules.
Fear. And all of this fear stems from the Jedi's original sin, which is the creation of the dark side, the Sith. There are many different ways this story is told through canon and legends and everything else in between, but more or less the original Jedi, the Jedi, whatever you want to call them, they practice light side and dark sides of the Force within themselves, as in they try to understand what the dark side and light side in every person was, and they learn how to control it internally instead of just focusing on one side of the Force. What eventually would happen is one group of Force users would start focusing more on the dark side until they were more or less consumed by it and its power. Or at least that's how the Jedi framed the story. We're supposed to believe that all, individuals without proper Jedi training are just going to become Dark Lords and crazy Sith. But, Cal Kestis is a great example of that not happening. Luke Skywalker, Rey Skywalker. There are a lot of people who never had any Jedi training and turned out completely fine. I would argue that many of these initial dark side Force users were simply just curious from an intellectual, philosophical, or perhaps even scientific point of view. I'm pretty sure that the first dark side Force users weren't inherently evil or lusting over power. They wouldn't have been accepted in the Jedi Order in the first place, right? And so the real original sin is not these Force users learning the dark side, it's actually how the mainstream Jedi institutions crack down on these various dark side Force using factions. Sometimes the Jedi would exile them, sometimes they would kill them and massacre them. What they wouldn't do is listen to them and try to find a way to coexist. There could have been some really amazing research being done, fully sanctioned Jedi research on the dark side, what it is, why it causes people to go insane. And instead, what the Jedi did was just close their minds off to anything from the dark side. They became fearful of it. If you take a look at the Jedi Order in the Golden Age of the Republic before the Clone Wars, it was a complete mess. It was bureaucratic, cold and unfeeling. The organization was run by old Jedi Masters who rarely even went into the field. They were huddled around their tower on Coruscant, blinded from the Force by Darth Sidious and blinded from the reality of the situation in the galaxy by their lack of exposure to the wider world. I imagine all the input they were getting was from the holograms and emergency reports from Jedi Knights in the most dire situation all across the galaxy. I don't care how wise and wrinkly your forehead is, if you're isolated in a tower and the only information you're receiving from the wider world are terrible reports of disaster and violence, that is going to affect how you see things. Your judgment will have a heightened sense of fear. If you think about it, all of these Jedi Masters were suffering from something known as mean world syndrome. This is actually a communications term devised in the age of radio and TV. It basically states that an individual who gets all of their information from the wider world through screens, in today's age it's more like social media and internet, they'll be bombarded basically by news which is slanted towards negativity because that's what we as human beings are attracted to. You know, it is a survival mechanism to be alerted about danger, but we never evolved.
That's a 100% true psychological thing. When I was in college, we had to take psychology. It was business administration, but we had to take psychology during it. And one of the things that you learn is that like how the news works, and you'll notice this after you hear this, or if you might already know this, when it comes to how the news is told to you. So whenever it's a negative story, that negative story will be told to you 100 times during that 2-hour long news broadcast, and you might get like some sprinkles of positive things, and it'll be like a few minutes. But usually they always focus on the negative, and the negative segments are always the longest segments. The positive segments are always the shortest segments. And you start noticing that. You start noticing like, why does it seem like this story of this person who did some kind of miraculous savior kind of thing, where they saved a school bus of children from a flood waters or whatever, that story will last like 10 minutes or less, and you'll never hear about it again for the rest of the day. But anything negative happening, you'll hear about that literally all day. And we keep watching. The reason why the news does that is because we're attracted to it. Their viewership jumps up whenever there's like negative stories to tell. Whenever there's anything negative to tell, the news views pop up. Whenever there's any kind of negative things to print, those websites click rate pop up because everyone's attracted to negativity. Even because like just regular fandom, people are drawn to the negative comments. Even when it comes to celebrities, what do they reply to the most? They always reply to the negative comments, not the positive comments. People are drawn to negativity.
Properly to deal with social media, which just sends danger to us constantly. And yes, this makes us feel like the world is a more dangerous and difficult place. This makes us more paranoid, more conservative, and fearful. And this is what I believe was happening to all of the Jedi Masters, the leaders of the Order. And so the Jedi were too busy worrying about everything and thinking the end of days was coming to have the time or the right mentality to take into account the various needs of individuals like Anakin or Qui-Gon or Dooku or other not typical Jedi. I mean, how could they? They were a huge organization at this point, and when you scale up anything, it becomes harder and harder to preserve your original message, your original product. And so protocols and general rules that fit the majority but not the minority began ruling the Jedi instead of well-meaning masters trying to custom create the perfect education for their younglings. I mean, Count Dooku's departure from the Jedi was the result of a half a century, if not more, of being disappointed and being told by his superiors that what he was interested in was completely dangerous, things like Jedi prophecies. The idea is that prophecies show us a Jedi's future, but in very vague terms, and a Jedi could become fearful if their future is not bright, and that might lead them to do rash things. Which is exactly what happened to Dooku anyway, because he just broke into the restricted section in the Hogwarts library and read the prophecy of you-know-who on his own free time. Look, if there...
That's a very quick summation of Dooku. I go into like a lot of stories of talking about Count Dooku because I've studied Count Dooku pretty extensively just via liking the actor and like in his backstory when it comes to Count Dooku. And basically, like, I don't view Dooku as a Sith at all. Everyone was pointing out he never had Sith eyes. I don't view Dooku as ever being a real Sith. I think he sided with the Emperor mostly because he felt like it was a better thing to do than what the Council was doing. A lot of when it comes to Dooku, if you pay attention to his character, he still has like those idealistic positive things of a Jedi, but he's just going about it in a different way than than the Jedi would, because it didn't work. Not only that, a lot of the reason why Dooku does what he does is because of Qui-Gon dying. A lot of Dooku, even when we watch like the Vision episodes, there's such a hole in him after Qui-Gon dies. It was like he viewed Qui-Gon kind of like a son figure, you know. And there was like, even before Qui-Gon died, he had those kind of like classic Jedi idealistic views, which, you know, isn't a bad thing. But the straw that broke the camel's back was Qui-Gon losing his life and Dooku feeling like he needs to do what he needs to do because the Jedi Council, you know, isn't doing things the right way.
There's one thing that the older generation always gets wrong with the younger generation. It's their attempt to suppress the passion and motivation the younger generations have for, you know, whatever they're doing in their lives. And that's usually because the older generation doesn't understand the younger generations. They don't understand that one day, these young people, the stupid thing they're into, it'll probably be mainstream because they're all gonna grow up one day and become consumers. I mean, when I was young, video games and watching Star Wars was not a viable path to create a profession and career. And look at me, I'm a freaking YouTuber now, and I mainly play video games and watch Star Wars movies for a living. And of course, you know, every generation makes this mistake because it's a part of the natural process of aging. We become more and more conservative, we become more closed-minded as we suffer more and more setbacks, as our own dreams get crushed and our own limitations are reached. But to do that to a younger generation, that is so f***ing cruel. I mean, it used to be that knowledge was the most important thing on earth. I mean, books and information were the key to success, and that's because not everyone had access. This was before the internet was widespread. Back then, you went to a library, you had to learn the Dewey Decimal System. And if you were relatively wealthy, your parents might, you know, get you an entire set of encyclopedia books at home, but that still only had a small fraction of all the knowledge every person with a phone has access to today. I mean, this is really the problem with having really, really old people in positions of power, whether it's a corporation, a government, or the Jedi Order. And it's not ageism, guys, it's common sense. There's a reason why we, don't let people vote until they're 18 years old. There's a reason why we don't let people run for president until they're in their 30s. So why are we allowing people who are, 70 or 80 years old run for office? There should be a limit on that end of the spectrum as well. Anyway, ideally, the Jedi should have just focused more on personal relationships instead of larger rules to govern everything. In many ways, they were already well suited to do so. The master-apprentice system was awesome. It's a time-tested method. And it's probably the only reason why many Jedi turn out normal. And that's because teaching a young person isn't as difficult as you think. You just have to show up, have good intentions, and not have a toxic relationship. And as long as you continue to show up and protect that child from, whatever great dangers are out in the galaxy, I think they'll be completely fine. A Jedi Master's job is not to just impose restrictions and prevent their younglings from going to the dark side. That's like a really pessimistic way of going into this relationship. A Master's job is to figure out what their apprentices' passions and motivations are, and then, helping that younger person channel all that positive energy into something more productive. Imagine a world where Count Dooku was able to study what he wanted with proper supervision from an older, wiser Jedi that could prevent him from going astray. Count Dooku was never destined to be evil. He just became so bitter because of all the bureaucracy and nonsense he experienced within the Jedi Order. He wasn't a bad person, he was just different, perhaps a bit more intelligent than your average Jedi Knight. And for that, because they were afraid he was going to turn into the dark side because he didn't fit into their system, he actually did turn into the dark side. The saddest thing about Count Dooku was he started out as a really good individual. He wanted to prove himself. I mean, most Jedi want to do good initially. Anakin wanted nothing but to protect his loved ones, a very noble desire. Even though some Jedi were always destined to go to the dark side because of their personality or whatever, far more Jedi went to the dark side because of the Jedi's very restrictive way of doing things. Remember, the original sin of the Jedi was this. They're the ones who created the Sith in the first place because they could not find a compromise. The Jedi really don't need to set rules to govern themselves. They can just follow the rules that all other citizens in the galaxy follow. They're not special. They don't need an institutionalized belief system, a one-size-fit-all dogma, because they're not a religious order. The Jedi were always going to be special individuals who just needed special attention and training so that they can get the most out of their potential. And what's important, what makes Cal Kestis so important and so special, what makes his training so great, is not his experience within the Jedi Order, but the strong foundation that was built around him by the Jedi Order and by his master. By simply being there for Cal, guiding him and influencing him, Jaro Tapal was able to teach this young boy the importance of honor, duty, and compassion. If you build a strong moral foundation for a young person, they should be able to understand exactly what they should or should not do. I mean, if you really have to create rules like don't kill an innocent person, then what exactly are we doing here? What are we teaching people that you need to remind them of this? The problem with rules and restrictions is that they're not perfect. They're not a one-size-fit-all solution. And a lot of times, you can gain a lot by bending the rules for specific people who are in specific situations. And if you don't do that, the amount of trauma and resentment you can create, like in Anakin's case or Dooku's case, could create all the problems you were afraid of in the very beginning. And look at Cal. Look at how awesome he turns out as a human being. Forget about being a Jedi. He's willing to risk his own safety to save his pal from falling to death. He's able to quickly tell that former Jedi Taron Malicos is bad-intentioned and that the dark side Dathomiri Night Sister Mirren could be an ally. I mean, had Cal been institutionalized, had he been a Mace Windu-style Jedi, he might have immediately trusted Taron for no reason other than because he's a fellow Jedi. Cal has proven time and time.
Not to mention, if Cal kind of like followed like the teachings of the the Jedi Council at that time period, he probably would have just tried to kill Mirren, because generally when it comes to Night Sisters, they use the dark side of the Force, air quotes, the dark side of the Force. So he would have just perceived her as evil and just tried to kill her, because she's a Force user who's not a Jedi, and her lineage of people tend to be on the evil side. So they just would have killed her, or tried to at least.
Again, with only the most basic training and life lessons from his master, that he is more than ready to fight the dark side. He never joins forces with a second sister. He never succumbs to even Darth Vader. And that's because he didn't really need anyone to tell him the dark side was evil, because he already understood that the dark side was evil. And that's because he understood who he was as a person. He understood what values he represented. And that really just comes from his master-apprentice relationship. It's from having a father figure in his life, something the Jedi clearly don't want younglings to develop, obviously. And so in the future, if you're ever responsible for creating, I don't know, a curriculum or a set of rules,
which we all kind of agree, if Anakin had a father figure or a friend, he wouldn't have turned. If Qui-Gon doesn't die, Anakin doesn't turn. If anyone decides to be like an actual friend for Anakin, he doesn't become friends with Palpatine. If Ahsoka doesn't leave, Anakin doesn't turn. Anakin does what he does because everyone who could be basically, let's say, a lightning rod for him ends up being gone. Either they die like Qui-Gon or they leave like Ahsoka.
Rules for an organization, don't just focus on creating punitive measures that prevent people from doing the wrong thing. Teach people why it's wrong in the first place. Don't be reactionary. Tell people how to get ahead of the game. So there you have it, guys. That is my analysis on Cal Kestis. I think his journey to becoming a Jedi Knight was really remarkable because he did it outside of the Jedi Order. This is definitely something we should take a closer look at, and maybe in the future this is what the Jedi Order looks like. A lot more decentralized and a lot more focused on the master and apprentice relationship, the most important parts of the Jedi system. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy.
Pretty solid video from Generation Tech, or Alan as his name is. I didn't grow up freaking like romanticizing a Jedi because I didn't like their rules. like I said, most people freaking they side with being, I want to be a great Jedi, so you don't like the rules. I feel like having these more human Jedis, like how Kestis, like how Obi-Wan is kind of more humanized in his series, and obviously Ahsoka. I feel like that just makes all the Jedi better. I feel like in the future, for the future of Star Wars, having these more humanized Jedi's will make people more gravitated towards the character. So, you know, that's something to look into. But anyways, that's it for this reaction. You know, show Generation Tech some love, give him a like, give him a subscription if you enjoy his content. Link to his original video will be in the description box below, as well as my Twitch stream. So if you want to follow me on Twitch, follow that link. I'll be doing some live streams, pretty much doing weekdays. But anyways, being boy and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Y'all stay safe, be kind to one another, do all things out there, like the video, comment, subscribe. I'm out of here. Deuces.